You could have a safe space in your girlfriend, but if she's getting her resources from porn, it's still technically not really safe. I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, it's like sometimes we're very quick to stereotype. Like men are just gonna talk about the physical, and women are gonna like ask questions about love and situationships. Like, I also have men who's like, you know, I'm afraid that I'm not pleasing her enough in bed. A whole forum of 63 million men reading about how to rape their wives. So you have that extreme of men who will pursue that. A lot of the questions I always get from guys are, what sex toys should I use with my partner? Men and sex toys can be a bit dicey because most of the time they assume a toy is to replace them. I have different types of workshops, right? I have Sex Ed 101. I call it bedroom recipes because it's like a cooking show, showing you all the different ingredients.
Yeah.
I'm showing you all the toys. I'm showing you the vulva. This is a clitoris. This is a prostate. And how different people have different pleasure. But you make up your own recipes. You figure out what works for you and what doesn't. Choking is wrong. If you want to do choking, here's the safe way to do it. Like rest to this part. They watch porn and they assume, okay, to be choked is like, there are actually points that you're supposed to hold where it is still safe. You're not crushing someone's windpipe.
In case nobody told you, the real conversation was always behind closed doors. You're in one right now. So, Noorin, thanks for being here. I've been really looking forward for this episode because I think your topic is going to be super amazing, super interesting. So I'm going to straight jump into the very first question because we agree not to actually cover the rest. But okay, everyone is searching for information about sex privately, but almost nobody is talking about it openly. Why do you think curiosity and conversations are so disconnected?
Oof, you're hitting me with the hard ones at the start. I wouldn't necessarily call it disconnected. I feel like just because we don't see it happening on mainstream or media so openly, it doesn't mean it's not happening. Like you pointed out, right? People are going online, they're trying to find stuff. But within friends or within like their own safe circles, they do kind of talk about sex. The problem is, what are they talking about? What's the information they're using, the resources, and there's still a lot of stigma just even talking about it, even revealing if you like sex or revealing what's happening with your partners. And you know how in Singapore at least, right, or in Asia context, it's still very, very taboo to, one, talk about sex, but two, to reveal stuff that's intimate and vulnerable, right? They see it as a weakness, or they see it as, I know the phrase in Malay, I'm trying to translate it to English, but basically like to air dirty laundry out, right? Jaga kain kind of thing, right?
Okay.
Yeah, so they don't want to lose face, is what I'm trying to say. So with all of those factors in, people are curious about it until they find a safe space to talk about it. And even then, they'll just kind of test waters. But once they do have that space and also a trusted source, I mean, it's all out there.
What is considered safe space?
Oh, that's a good one. Because I feel like it's a term that gets thrown around quite often, right? And it's very like psychobabble, like safe space, mindfulness. I want to say, like, well, first of all, you have the feeling of being seen, not being judged, right? And but not just that, like whatever is revealed does not go outside whatever space there is, right? And that's something that I always emphasize whenever I run a workshop or like when people confide in me. That's, I want to say, is the bare minimum. But safety also in terms of the actual, how legitimate the space and resources, right? You could have a safe space in your girlfriend, but if she's getting her resources from like porn or like, it's still technically not really safe. So, so I think that's a really great question. Yeah.
Do you think it is safe to talk about it openly with our partners as well, or not necessarily?
I think that's very interesting how you pointed that out. You would assume your partner would be your safe space, right?
Yeah.
So again, going back to the feelings of being seen, being heard, and not being judged. Unfortunately, and I've seen it happening in a few of my workshops, so when people come and confide, they do admit that they can't talk to their partners about it.
Okay.
Because of that very dynamic between them, right?
Yeah.
Because when you're with a partner, that's the person who knows all your vulnerabilities, all your weaknesses, right? And on good times, amazing, right? And on bad times, we're all human. Sometimes it's used against us. It becomes like, and this is interesting because it's something that I've been thinking about lately. Sometimes your partner, let's say, wants to give feedback, right? But the other side will interpret it as criticism, right? Or like, I'm not good enough, or why are you always doing this to me? And it becomes not just the dynamic between the two of you, but it's also what are you projecting and what exactly is going on within you as well. So there's a lot of different areas in play. So I want to say the short answer is your partner should be your safe space, but the longer, more nuanced answer is that it also depends on your own self-worth and the stories you're telling yourself too, between you and your partner.
You talk about workshops, right? People come over, to confide in you. Are they generally of a certain specific gender that feels space and comfortable confiding in you?
I would say in general, so I used to do mixed gender workshops. And then now I'm kind of focused more on like ladies only or vulva owners, right? And the reason for that is not because I want to exclude the men, because the women themselves feel safer to be able to say certain stuff. But when it comes to confiding or sharing, I would say that both genders do end up talking about it. But I do find that the men would usually DM me.
Do what?
DM. So sometimes I can't tell, like, either it's sliding in my DMs for other reasons, but you'll always get those in my field. You'll always get those who kind of want to just try their luck. But there are some really genuine people who would write in because they have issues in their relationships, right? Or even about them and sex. And most of the time, I do, give them resources or pass them on to like the professionals that I know would be better equipped at handling it. But otherwise, I see that both genders do have very similar questions.
I'm going to follow on that further.
Yeah. Feel like rapid fire.
Yes, exactly.
Just jumped in.
Yes. So you're saying the men do actually reach out to you, but via DM.
Yeah.
Via writing.
Yes.
Not in person.
They attend my workshops.
Okay.
When it comes to Q&A though, it's quite, I would say, not as, if there are perhaps more guys, and I've had this before. Ironically, it was funny because it was like a Friends with Benefits workshop, right?
Yeah.
So of course I assumed there's going to be more men, but there were some ladies. And then, and at the end of it, when I was asking, okay, so anyone has any questions, I assume it'd be all about sex.
Yeah.
Right? Friends with Benefits, that's the topic. But actually the questions just became how to flirt, how to engage with someone. And then they all started sharing about their dating lives, like how difficult it is on an app. How do I keep a girl interested, etc. So, I mean, I feel like at the end of the day, it's like sometimes we're very quick to stereotype, like, like men are just going to talk about the physical and women are going to like ask questions about love and situationships.
Yeah.
Both kind of pretty much the same. But what they have in common is that people would only start sharing after that initial, I know in the first hour, first half an
Once
hour.
it kind of settled down, get
Everyone's
eased
still really
in.
quiet. Everyone's like really still like so scared. And I bring my props, I bring my like penises and vulvas and whatever. And then I'll have to start cracking a joke or I'll share my own story. And I'm not like joking for the sake of joking.
Yeah.
But I do share stories that I think are relevant, right? Or that would resonate for them according to whatever is the topic.
Okay.
And that's when I see the smiles, and that's when I see the heads going like, yeah, that happened to
You
me
can
too.
relate and start opening up. With all that, I know you did answer this, you did share with the, about the Asians and the non-Asian, right?
Yeah.
With the workshops and the sliding message on DMs writing to you, are they predominantly Asian or non-Asian? Mixed.
Pretty much, yeah. I would say, I mean, most of my followers are from Singapore. Singapore, Malaysia, and like random friends from like all over the world, right? But I think because of the nature of the brand, Shy and Curious, I am targeting those that, just like the name, they are very curious about it, but they are scared to Google it, or they are scared to at least admit that they are interested in finding out this information. So my content will go through the lens of the Asian context. So like maybe semi-conservative. So for example, if I want to write about ethical non-monogamy, right? I can't really go out there like, have orgies, have swings, whatever, right? But I would kind of phrase it in a way that's a bit softer, so that at least they read it and they'll be like, because at first they'll look at it and be, they'll be a bit petrified at it, but then at least they will like, okay, no, let me just read it, and doesn't mean that I'm gonna go ahead and like go get a threesome or something. But at least the curiosity is sparked and they have information, and then if it resonates, then they can find out more. Yeah.
So Noorin, when people send you questions, what does the volume and nature of those questions tell you about what's actually missing? Not just in sex education, but in how people relate to each other. Chill. Okay, maybe firstly you can actually share what are those typical question or typical message that you receive, right? You were saying about in workshops it's more of like dating tips, how to flirt. What about the actual XEX question? What are those questions like?
Okay.
The majority of it, and what's actually missing in terms of not only sex education, but how people are relating to each other.
So I'm going to flip it around. To be honest, I don't get questions as much as I get DMs thanking me for the work. Or I read this article, it resonated. I went for this workshop, I felt seen. And I feel like, and that's whether they've met me before in real life, or they're really just reading my essays. To me, it points out that just talking about it, right, is something that's lacking so much that if I go up, like, do you know what's the most viral or the most like read essay on my blog? It has nothing to do with sex.
Tell me more.
It was actually, I wrote this piece like almost really early on, and it was actually the kickstart to, because when I started a blog, it was very educational. Like, 3 ways to not have painful sex, or talking about periods or whatever, right? Toy reviews. It was great to have the information out there, but it was one day. I had a really great first date, also I thought. And I was like 35 back then, and and I'm already like thinking like, oh no, I need a ring soon, right? And then at the end of the date, and I thought everything was going well, and then he's about to send me off, and he's like, let's stay in touch. Okay. And that's like, I feel like that's like the death knell, not just like even like professionally, right? Stay in touch is just a nice way of saying, you're not gonna see me, right? So sure enough, after that, like I got like a little like, oh, I had a wonderful date, blah blah blah. Silence. I spiraled, and then next day he's like, hey, I had a nice time, but we're not really feeling it. And then I cried, and then I was just like, what is wrong with me? Because like it was just a date, and and I'm preaching like people have boundaries, people have tastes, respect. And then But I decided I'm gonna write about it because I saw my therapist, and then she was going through the motions with me too, and she was just like, well, you fell in love with the potential and you fell in love with the story. And as much as it was so embarrassing to admit it and so revealing, I decided, fuck it, I'm gonna just write it. And I posted it. And that's up to now still my most read essay. And the funny thing was, I was with one of my best friends, and he said, "You know what's funny? I had lunch with another friend, and we don't know each other, right?" And she's like, "Hey, I need to show you this link. There's this really great essay. It's the story of my
It's your
life."
vlog.
And it was that same essay, and that was the moment that I'm like, oh, maybe it's not so bad to reveal the vulnerable stuff. So going back to your question, what kind of things are missing, right? It's really just the idea that we drop our faces, so drop our guard down and we feel like, I'm still looking for love. I have so many female followers who are slightly older who also write in and say like, I had a shitty date, I'm gonna give up, or like, and on the flip side, I also have men who's like, you know, I'm afraid that I'm not pleasing her enough in bed. So I feel like at the end of the day, everyone has their own stories and they are vulnerable. But because we don't talk about it enough, they assume they're alone, right? And so I provide this space that's like, I'm going to talk about all the things that's supposed to be a shame. I'll talk about sex, I'll talk about bodies, I'll talk about my lack of a love life, you know, that kind of thing. And only recently too, I've, because obviously the older I get too, there's other aspects of life coming in, perimenopause, kind of shitty. And then transiting from like a full-time job to making this my career and like having to work at Shopee for overnight. And the fact of admitting it was so embarrassing and so shameful that I thought this will make a good story. And when I put it out, again, resonated. Like people were writing and saying, I lost my job last year.
People are going through the same thing, right?
Like I lost my job last year. I'm a part-time cashier and you know, and I was feeling really shitty until I read your stuff. So going back to the question, I know I digress. I think it's less about the topics as opposed to just being real with people and knowing you're not alone and that, well, I mean, it's life. It's as serious as we make it out to be, right?
I don't know why people, I mean, I should tell this myself as well. I always associate myself, my identity should be tied to my job and the business that I run in. And I'm sure everyone feels the same way too.
Yeah, no,
a lot to reflect on that.
I mean, I feel like it's normal. I think and then it's what we're conditioned to, right? Like growing up, you get tied to school.
Exactly.
And your accomplishments. And then you get out of it and you're like, okay, then it's good job. Right? And then you have family.
What is good job?
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like and it's tied to money and all of that.
And how much money?
Exactly. So
it's never ending.
You're always comparing yourself. And to break out of it is I almost feel to me, talking about sex is nothing compared to like shit. Like I get this identity and money and success and jobs. And I think that's also a conversation that doesn't happen, at least in Singapore.
Like a safe platform for us to really talk openly about it, not getting judged. Going back to sex, right? I always thought that men find it so easy to talk about it openly with their friends. Is that the case? Is my assumption correct? Because I don't know, when growing up, I grew up with my brother. I see my brothers hanging out with their friends and they are talking about it. I'm like, ew, PG, R-rated. Why are they talking about this? Rude. But from where the angle I was, looking and observing and listening, right? Then I'm like, so comfortable talking about it. I don't know whether is it the case or from your experience maybe it's not at all.
I would say there's like two camps on this, right? So you do have the men who are more like sexually explicit. And unfortunately sometimes it happens on platforms that are terrible platforms, right? And like I forgot where it was, but they had that whole forum of 63 million men reading about how to rape their wives. So you have that extreme of men who will pursue that. But I do feel that in general, there's locker room talk, right? There's locker room talk, like, yeah, she's easy or whatever. But if you really ask them in terms of when they're with their friends, when it comes to talking about relationships and sex within the relationships, they might not be as comfortable as the women, right? Women will get around and like, you know, he did this or this. Is this normal or whatever, right? Men may not have that space. And that's when they tend to like...
Is it because everyone's supposed to be the alpha, everyone's supposed to be performing, but yet in the locker room, they're afraid to talk about it?
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that's it. I mean, again, I'll admit, I'm generalizing, right? Until we ourselves live in that experience. But from what I've encountered and from the questions or comments sent in, a lot of men do write in saying that they actually turn to me because they don't have anyone else to talk to. And I'm like, I'm a stranger on the internet and I'm not a man, right?
Yep.
So I also don't know if that's part of like the like sliding into my DM kind of thing, but the really genuine ones, they almost become friends. They'll actually update me about their love life. You know, I had someone who started off writing to me because he was single and now he's engaged. And I mean, he'll still like, whenever I post something, he'll like, haha, and maybe just make a sex joke or whatever. But he's happily in love with his fiancée, right? But I feel, to me, it's again that idea that they don't have that in real life and they didn't feel comfortable enough, because also they do, I mean, they still do, not just sharing their stories, but they do ask me for actual information. A lot of the questions I always get from guys are, what sex toys should I use with my partner?
Very specific.
Very, very specific. Like, I'm in a long distance relationship with my partner. What can I get? How do I get this through customs? I mean, to a certain point, I almost feel like, maybe I should have set up some like FAQ on my site, right? I get all these questions all the time.
Yeah.
But it also makes me quite heartened because men and sex toys can be a bit dicey because most of the time they assume a toy is to replace them or like because there's something lacking in the bedroom, or it's like, again, going back to how, you know, talking about safe spaces and partners, even giving feedback like, you know, let's bring a toy in the bedroom. Men would kind of have a wall up and like, are you saying I'm not good enough? Are you saying I'm not pleasing you enough?
Won't that apply to women as well?
Men don't really ask for women for sex toys, at least when it comes to relationships, because to be honest, most men are like, I have my hands. Why do I need a toy, right? Women, just anatomy-wise, like only 20% of us can come through penetration, right? So, and most of us need clitoral stimulation to achieve orgasms. Easiest way to do it is with a toy. But because we're all not trained in that, or we're not taught that in public schools, right? Like, who cares about pleasure, right? It's all very functional. It's all very biological. So that's when my workshops come in. That's when the essays come in. And that's when sometimes women will tell me, and the most common question I get is, I really want to buy one. I want to use one, but I need to hide it from my partner. Or how do I even bring the conversation up? Or how do I use it with him?
Yeah,
and
without offending them.
Exactly. So those are the questions I get. So again, going back to, it's never really about knitting. It's never really about the toy or the position. Or it's always the relationship dynamics.
You mentioned about there's no sex education at school. Has any school actually reached out to you talking about it? Because there's a lot of unprotected sex. And because of that, it leads to, you know, child outside of marriage and all. And
I think sex education in Singapore is always one of those things, even in Asia. Let's just talk about Asia in general. It's always going to be slightly tricky. Just because, and we always assume, oh, the West is doing it so well. They're open, they talk about it. And it's not really. In the US, it started off with still very abstinence focused, still very like Christian values. And sex education didn't really come into like the 70s. And even then, stuff like the AIDS pandemic that got, you know, under the covers, and no one would want to talk about it because they still center it around values. So the West still had eons ahead of us. But even now, you know, there's still like abortion is illegal in some states. We always assume that one's doing better than Asia. But in Asia itself, of course, it's also tricky because we have the challenge of multiple races, multiple cultures, multiple religions. If I talk about like, I'm giving you all the information, you do what you want with it, some people are going to say that's irresponsible. Or are you trying to promote, premarital sex? And that's what I find a little bit of a challenge, right? Just because we're teaching you about it doesn't mean we're making you go and do it, right? We're giving you really here's what's out there. So you, as an adult or semi-adult, if let's say we're talking about sex education, will at least be guided and not like, I'm only going to tell you, here's the body parts, don't do it until you're married or whatever. And I find also like lately, the reason why it's also a little tricky is because the society is a bit different now, right? So back then, family unit still something that's pushed. And even now, obviously, the government is still pushing family unit, have more kids, reproduce. But the reality is people are staying single longer, right? Child-free. So how do you slip in a abstinence, focus, sex set if the family unit isn't really the same? Even something like having parents of like, queer parents. Even things like just talking about the different types of sexualities out there, that's still taboo. It's still like reserved for Pride Month. And the rest of the time, it's not really still seen. So I feel like there's
way more work need to be done.
Like a lot more work. And I feel like if we just depend solely, again, on the public system, but also teachers are not trained for it. But then when you outsource it to outside vendors, then what's their intention? Why are they doing it, right? So it's one of those really big questions. I wouldn't say I'm avoiding it, but I would say it's something that I feel we are not really ready yet.
I don't know, because to me, like what you're saying, right? We assume that the West should be way progressive in terms of this. And I thought within Asia, Singapore, it is a progressive country, right? So I thought things would be more at a mature, established level. Nope, that's not the case.
I feel like all you have to do is sadly look at the comments on a Straits Times article. Anything to do with sex, anything to do with...
That's true, actually.
Like, this is a really sad case. And I don't know, like, by the time this goes up, there was that unfortunate lady who got raped twice in a single night, right? Where she went out, she got taken advantage of because she was drinking. And an hour later, someone else came in and she thought she was going to be saved and he raped her. The comments on that were, she deserved it. Why was she drinking?
Cruel.
And worse, they were making fun of that. They were making fun of the men. They were saying like sloppy seconds, all that shit, right? And you read it and your heart breaks for her. But your heart breaks also like these people writing the comments are people you live with. They're your neighbors. You don't know. Maybe they're the people you meet in the street. It might be your colleagues. You never know. And we're going back to the safe space. One-on-one, we're fine. Right? You can tell me your secrets, I tell you my secrets. But when we're in a collective and a group, like sometimes I get asked, aren't you ever worried about backlash? You're a visibly brown woman talking about all of this, right? And it's very easy for me to say like, oh, I don't care. I don't subscribe to like rules. But I also know maybe it'll affect my family. Maybe, there are some boundaries that I do have to set up, not because I don't want to talk about it, but there's repercussions for the rest of people surrounding me. So I lost track of how we got here, but okay, yes, sex education, right? Singapore is not as progressive.
Yeah, I know.
Singapore is not as progressive. Yeah. We're shiny on the outside, but...
I'm just also putting myself in that position, right? Like, do I feel safe talking about it so openly? Maybe not. And why is that so?
I mean, it's still taboo.
Yeah. And okay, speaking about, SEX, sex education, right? Let's move away from this school sex education, right? Back to Shy and Curious, your workshops. What is the question that shows up again and again when it comes to sex?
How do I not catch feelings? Yeah.
Okay.
Because most of the time, people attend. I have different types of workshops, right? I have Sex Ed 101. I call it bedroom recipes because my philosophy is it's like a cooking show, right? I'm showing you all the different ingredients.
Yeah.
I'm showing you all the toys. I'm showing you this is the vulva, this is a clitoris, this is a prostate, da 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 da. And how different people have different pleasure. But you make up your own recipes. You figure out what works for you and what doesn't.
Yeah.
So that's why my workshops are a bit different from just a very straightforward sex ed one. I also run a lot of workshops around situationships.
Yeah.
So those are the two popular ones. And, obviously now it's situationships. Before that was friends with benefits. Before that was fuck buddies. They're all the same thing. It's the idea of dating someone or being with someone or looking for casual sex without commitment. And a lot of times people are keen to pursue it or try it out. And who doesn't? It's pleasure, right? But then the number one question I always get is, I just want to sleep with someone, but how do I not catch feelings? Oh, I caught feelings. What do I do
People
next?
catch feelings just like that, knowing that it's one night stand?
Yeah. Because, to me, it's a trick question. And I always say that to them. I say, because I always start off like, I'm going to answer this number one question. And then the next slide is like, you don't, it's a trick question. You always catch feelings. But then what you have to do is you have to be very, very self-aware about why you're doing this. So your intentions. For some people, they're just exploring their sexuality. Some people will say, I want to get over a breakup. Some people will be like, I'm really attracted to this person. And some will say, I actually want more. And I'm hoping when I get into this, there'll be more.
So behind that question, there's actually multiple factors.
Exactly. And then, so, I always start off like, well, you have to be self-aware. Why are you doing this? Then you have to know your attachment style. Right? I'm anxiously attached. That means once I like someone, I'm checking my phone every 5 minutes. Did he reply yet? Did he put his Instagram story? Did he see my story, my thirst trap? That kind of thing. And then, I'll admit it. But then there are people who are avoidantly, who are avoidants, right? So there's no, most people are either or they're in the nice middle, which is the secure style of attachment. But if you know what kind of attachment style you are, then it's also easier that once you get into this, let's say you're seeking a casual relationship, you recognize your own triggers. So I'm not saying that if you're anxiously attached, you can never have casual sex. But it's just that I recognize my triggers. Like, yes, if I sleep with someone, and then, like I say, and then I start seeing if he has a new follower, that kind of thing, right? And then I start like spiraling and like, well. And then I know, I'm starting to catch feelings, right? Then what do I do next? Either
block them.
No, that's Well, it depends. So it depends on how you want to parent yourself, right? So let's say the sex is great, and it's just you, and it's like, okay, so either you detach yourself. Don't build this story of, basically you ask yourself, what is the story I'm building? Like, are you putting this person on a pedestal? Or, maybe there should be an expiry date, or maybe actually you really, really just want a partner and so this is not right for you and you need to cut it off. Or the part that actually I tell everyone in the class to do, but no one wants to do it. Or like, it's the hardest thing is sit down with them and say, hey, I like you, actually, and I want to know if you felt the same way, and if you do, I would like to pursue this, and if you don't, it was fun. And
is it just us women who actually introspect and reflect a lot when it comes to this, not to catch feelings, how to, afraid to catch feelings?
No.
It's the men as well.
Yeah, the situationship workshops is one of those I do mixed genders. I wouldn't say that it's only women. Sometimes it's funny because sometimes women are the avoidant ones. I've had incidents where people are like, I really want sex from this guy, but he wants to be a boyfriend. What do I do next? Right? And so it's not like what I've learned in all these years of doing this is I cannot assume, not based on genders, not based on age or culture or whatever. I just walk into it open mind. The only thing that they all have in common is that they're all human and they don't want to feel alone. And the fact that they're bringing it up, I'm on it, that they feel safe enough to do that.
Yeah.
And I try to make sure that I'm doing my best to be able to, if it's not me answering their question, this is above my pay grade, I'm going to refer you to a specialist, or actually you need to talk to a doctor, or, I have a friend who's a really good therapist, that kind of stuff. So I think that's, so going back to the question of is it just the ladies being introspective? No, not really.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you this question. Maybe it might sound silly, or maybe, but I can imagine people who are curious out there, who are listening to this, who are watching this, they might have the same question, right? Whenever people ask you any question, do you notice, is it mostly a knowledge gap? Or is it because there's so many misinformations, inaccurate information out there? Or is it something else entirely?
I would say a gap, closer to a gap, because my audience are those that they come to me because they're experiencing something and maybe they feel it's not right, or they're uncomfortable, or they feel but I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I've had an orgasm before, that kind of thing, right? And then,
or whether is that an orgasm?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a knowledge gap there, but it's perfectly valid, right? Because it's not like we're in bio class and an orgasm feels like, that kind of thing. And when you watch porn, which is the only other sex ed out there, right? You just assume, okay, orgasm means I'm screaming my ass off, or I'm squealing like a Japanese porno. And so everyone has their own different, what they know, or what they don't know, right? So there's a little bit of a gap there. Misinformation, I would say, maybe in terms of when they're talking to friends.
Okay.
Or
because it doesn't work. What works for you doesn't work for me, right? Is that considered misinformation?
I mean, okay. To me, misinformation would be really just watching porn and assuming it's like that.
Okay.
Yeah. To me, so because they don't have anyone else to talk to, so they take references from the not so great places, right? I'm not hating on porn. The good stuff is good. But if you're using it as an educational tool, that's where it gets a bit tricky.
Yeah. And the reality, the expectation versus reality.
Exactly, because then what happens is that sex becomes a performance, right? And that's something that also is talked about a lot in my classes, because I'll have questions from people like, I did this in with my partner, or my partner expects this. And what I always get, and I know it will come right after, is this normal? And to me, it feels, I don't say it feels sad, but it also feels like we're still putting things into very binary, is this right or wrong? Is this normal? Not normal, kind of thing. And a lot of that is, because we don't know. We don't know what we don't know, right?
Yeah.
But it's also still the idea that being a good girl, being a slut, being a whore, being a pervert, versus people have different kinks and preferences. And then that's why I'm such a big advocate of let's teach everyone everything and let people figure out.
Or when you come to the recipe thing, right?
Yeah,
Is it?
yeah.
Okay,
And
I understand.
Let people figure out what works for them and not. But it's still the number one rule, right? Don't harm yourself and don't harm others. I try not to impart a value judgment on it.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
Yeah. So it's not choking is wrong or whatever, right? It's if you want to do choking, here's the safe way to do it. Grasp this part. Don't,
I cannot imagine how can they not understand that a certain type of choking is not safe.
No, but because again, they watch porn. They watch porn and they assume, okay, to be choked is grab it. But then there are actually points that you're supposed to hold where it is still safe. You're not crushing someone's windpipe. Things like this, again, not really in normal sex ed. Oh, again, I use the word normal, right? But not in mainstream sex ed.
I learned something interesting through this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even something like restraints. I have friends who are shibari experts, right? Shibari is Japanese bondage. And even in classes, he always teaches about safety. He teaches about you have to be careful where you tie, because if you hit certain nerves, you can paralyze the person. You can produce nerve damage, right? If you just look at a forum or go on a porn site and you're just like, okay, I can tie, I can do that too. I can do a sailor's knot, whatever. That's where injury happens. That's the whole like bad side of being repressed and stuff.
And you do workshops for that kind? Like,
I work with friends previously for that. I've actually taken a little bit of a step back because I'm also like reevaluating what's really important for my audience. But I'm always a big believer of like sharing resources and collaboration. So like if people do want to know a shibari expert, I'll point you to the right person.
I wanted to ask you this question, but I'm not sure whether it's still relevant. The question was, what's the gap between what parents tell their kids, what schools teaches, and what people actually need to know?
Okay.
Because I was like, okay, even the schools are not teaching. It's still a stigma kind of thing, taboo thing. Why would parents want to actually teach them? Or do you know anyone who actually...
I don't know about you, but parents of our gen or my gen, right, is still like, let's not even talk about sex. Right? Like, just, they don't even talk about dating, don't talk about like, go to school, get your degree, and suddenly, boop, I need you to be married. Like, you missed out the dating part. Then you have expectations of this. And then you get married, and then where's my grandkid? And the only education probably there is like stuff like talking about periods. Maybe a dad would talk to the son about masturbation or whatever, and then maybe the mom would talk to the girl, don't get knocked up. I mean, I'm not blaming parents because that's what they grew up with. That's what they inherited as well. So now in terms of like my friends who are moms, they're definitely a bit more open, but it's still less of the pleasure side of sex. It's still very, functional, biologically driven, but it's also a lot of the safe stuff, like no one should be touching your, private parts and boundaries and all that, which is amazing.
Or use a condom.
Yeah.
Not so much of like how to do it.
Yeah. I don't know if I've had friends who would admit that they taught their kids how to use that, because they're still not like, they're becoming teenagers, but not there yet. But I do have these conversations with my friends where I'm like, hey, so when are you guys gonna have the bits and the bees talks, right? Aware does have this program. I'm not sure if they're still running it, but they do have a bits and bees talk to help parents prepare for having it with their kids. But I think it still goes back to, if the parents themselves don't actually know sex at 101, one, they don't know the actual knowledge.
Yeah.
Right? But two, we're not really taught how to talk about sex. Right? I've been doing this for 5 years. I can talk anyone's ears of sex. And I can, depending on who my audience is, I'm able to craft it in a way that is comfortable for them.
Yeah.
But if you, like right now, how comfortable are you chatting about sex if it wasn't me? Right?
No, not at all.
Yeah. So having said that, nothing to you at all, but
that's why we're having this.
Yeah. So that's why I feel like sometimes as easy it is for us to say, the education needs to come from the parents or the teachers need to do it, right?
Yeah, you will see a lot of comments like this as well on the internet.
But right at the start, we in society, we don't know how to talk about sex, right? It's either we make fun of it. We go from extremes. We're like, we're so embarrassed that we joke about it.
Yeah. And we thought that sex is, the moment we talk about sex, is a dirty thing.
Yeah.
Not actually something that we need to talk about openly. And
so I feel like it's always tied to the two big ugly things, right? It's always tied to like shame and guilt, right? And then you add on like religion in there. You add on like
so many
people's
nuances.
expectations. That's why it's one of those where I know it will always be, there'll always be something for me to do. I would always have like, in terms of if it ever comes a day where I'm not needed to like blab around about my love life, that would be amazing. But for now, I used to joke when I first started out, like, I will be the lightning rod of shame for people. Like, if you're too embarrassed about something, I will reveal it first so that, you're comfortable. So whether it's like getting stood up on a date, that happened to me. Whether it's like falling for someone I shouldn't have, whether it was this, and it's a funny story I usually tell during workshops. I don't know if I'm ready to have it out on camera, but let's just say, having a bathroom incident accidentally, right? Like, I would be the first to say it out loud, because then if I share that, and sure, I'm embarrassed, and sure, maybe there are some things that maybe I shouldn't have said it, right? But at the end of the day, if it makes you feel less alone, if it makes you feel like, oh wow, okay, it's not just me, I've done my job. Yeah, and that's my purpose. Yeah.
You mentioned about generations, right? Our our parents' generation, our generation. I'm just curious, all the workshop, I don't know whether do you ask like, certain question that kind of like understand their age, not only gender. Gender you can tell by the name, right? But for age, do you usually ask, and do you usually have Gen Z or mostly millennials?
I think that's quite an interesting question. So, when I used to host like workshops maybe twice a month, because I had a venue that I was kind of tied to. That it actually depends mostly on the venue and their community, right? So my community, in terms of gender balance and age, is that I do have more female followers. Okay, I have more female followers, and then I. Mostly around my age, but then if I check it out, that I have some Gen Zs and then some slightly older folks. All right. But then when it comes to the actual events themselves, I can never tell. Okay. So I want to say they range from 20s to maybe the oldest person I've ever gotten was like in their 50s. Okay. But having said that, I also do collaborate with communities with Screaming Pigeons. She's a great friend of mine.
Yeah, I saw that on
Asha, she's great. She's so good at building this really organic community of 20 to 30-year-old women who really want genuine relationships and experiences that's just outside of like work or school, right? And so when I collaborate with her on events, then yes, the age is skewed younger. Okay. But in terms of people and what they're concerned with, it's still the same. I could close my eyes and I can tell like where they're from, or I think that's always also the misconception that Gen Z is so cool and that they don't care and they're like open about sex, right? Well, on the surface, it seems that way. Like they're very nonchalant, but they are actually also, they usually ask more of the relationship questions.
You were talking about workshops. You have a group of a mixed group, but also men and women, right? Yep. But are they usually married couples, long-term partners? And do they talk about sex more than single people?
To be honest, when I run these workshops, I never really ask about their status.
Okay. So they don't really share?
No, because the only thing I ask from them is like, show up, come with an open mind. I always start with the house rules, right? Whatever's said here stays here. Safe space, no judgment. If at a point of time they are uncomfortable, they feel free to step out. I don't take it personally. But I also do lay out that, hey, everyone comes from different cultures, beliefs, experiences, orientation, etc. And just for this brief moment in time, I'm asking everyone to put it aside, right? And so that's why I never really get into like, are you married? Are you single? Whatever. But what I do start usually with is I'll get everyone to kind of close their eyes, and I do ask a series of questions that will help me kind of calibrate whatever I have to say next. So, again, one of those things where I don't want to go in assuming things about people. So, but there's also, because I have a little agenda, is that I want them to also feel safe. I also want them to get ready for potential topics that might come up.
Yeah.
So I'll ask them, close your eyes, make sure everyone's know that no one else is seeing it, and I say, if it's a yes to this question, raise your hand. So then I'll go into, I've had sex before, I had penetrative sex before, I've had oral sex, I've had anal sex. I know what an orgasm is like. I know what turns me on, what turns me off. And based on that, so that's why, like, even early on when I said some people don't know if they've ever had an orgasm before.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why that question is actually something I bring up is because it is something that gets asked at workshops. And that is something that even my own friends, those who have been married, those who have kids, have asked me secretly, like, like, actually, how does it feel like, right? And that's why I don't want to be like quick to like, what do you mean? Or like, oh, if you have to ask this question, it means you've never had it. But everyone experiences things very, very differently.
Yeah.
So in terms of questions, maybe what I'll ask is, are you in I am in a relationship right now, or I am single. And that's the extent. But I won't be like, are you married or whatever? Because at the end of the day, it does not affect what I'm teaching.
Yeah.
Because it's still how well do you know your body? How well do you know your partner's body?
More
right?
focus on the topic.
More focus on that. The only time it comes up is if the attendees themselves bring it up.
Okay.
They'll say, I've been married for a while, things look different, how can I spice it up? Or my body's going through changes, so I just given birth, things like that. They volunteer the info, but otherwise I don't necessarily have classes around specific just for them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense then. Building a platform around a topic people are still embarrassed by means you become the face of something people associate with judgment, right? Like what you said. What does that actually cost you personally, professionally, socially?
My love life, my lack of. Okay, jokes aside, so when I started the platform, right, I was actually attached to someone that I honestly thought this was going to be a long-term partner, whatever. And we broke up like maybe in the first year or so. Nothing to do with what I do. So I didn't expect to navigate finding a partner while having this platform. So it makes my dating life very interesting because I'm always very open about what I do and who I am, right? So, and that's something that I pride myself on. Whatever you read, the tone of voice is the same way I'm speaking right now, I'm speaking to you. So I never want people to say like, offline and online is just so different. The only difference is maybe I'm a little quieter at first when you meet me in real life. But having said that, so then when it comes to dating, not every person wants to be with someone who might end up potentially writing about them, right? I always put a disclaimer.
Okay.
I put a disclaimer like, whatever I do end up writing about, I fudge details, I combine people. And it's never really about them. It's about my experience of the dynamic, right? Unless they're really like the terrible ex that shall not be named kind of thing, right? But it also makes a really good litmus test in terms of, so those who are more open-minded, those who can handle having someone who's very vocal about pleasure. But it's also like in the bedroom sense of things, then they themselves, I find, become more open with me too in terms of exploring, right? Because I am able to like, okay, let's figure out your body parts and what works and what doesn't. It's called pleasure mapping. It's really interesting. And so in a way, I think it's added a different dimension to my dating lives, like before and after having this blog. But it is kind of tough. It is tough, right? And I'm going to get flagged for saying this out loud, but I mean, I've stayed off dating apps for the past 3 years now. Just because I want to focus on my thing. And at that point of time, I knew I was I was not properly healed.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Then.
And it ended up becoming more of like I'm dating for the sake of dating. You know, or I'm dating for the sake of validating my self-worth versus that I have a great life and I wouldn't mind having a partner to accompany it, right?
More intentional.
Yeah, more intentional. And I've been very lucky that then actually, even though I've stayed off the dating apps, that the people that I do meet in real life are people that I would have never swiped. Right? Because they're not my usual type, right? I wouldn't, but in real life, we click, we connect. And yeah, and I'm you know, next episode. But yeah, then I ended up giving those people a chance and then likewise. And I'm, even though maybe they all don't work out, but I'm learning something new about them and I'm learning something new about me. So in terms of like costs to my like personal life, I want to say, you know, there's some trade-offs. And that's just, we're only talking about dating, right? In terms of family, I am quite lucky in the sense that I have an understanding family. But also because like, even from young, they always know that they, you know, I'm never going to follow the right path, right? So yeah, I went to good schools and stuff, but then I decided I want to go to art school. I want to be a fashion designer, right? I want to go to New York and stay abroad and like be the most non-Asian person ever. So they're very used to me deciding what I want to do in life and just going
that
for it.
should be immediate family, right? What about relatives then?
Likewise, they know
They know.
because
Okay, that's good.
and they're, I wouldn't say they openly talk to me about it, right? But they're aware of what I do, and sometimes they're proud of it in terms of like, you know, when I get placements in newspapers or magazines, they are proud. They are proud to see that. But if you ask them what do I actually do, they have no idea.
Okay.
You know, they will just like, yeah, she does workshops, but they wouldn't really want to acknowledge exactly the type of workshops.
Okay.
And I've had, you know, relatives and close friends who do come to me for personal advice. So in a way, I feel like, you know, you don't have to be like openly embracing me. It'll be nice, but you know, again, also the Asian very stoic family, like good job versus like, yo, amazing kind of thing. But yeah, in terms of family, not really anything that's like making me, you know, pause or like restricting me. But having said that, that's going back to, I am also very aware that I have to be mindful of my words. So what I say, even in interviews, even in writing the essays, because there is that line between, am I saying too much that might hurt people around me?
That was my next question, actually.
That would hurt people around me, or like, and
Do
again,
they think you've gone too far, you know, that kind of thing.
But also, I'm also very, when it comes to writing, I'm always self-editing as I write too, because there will be a moment where, am I writing this for the sake of I'm the main character and this person has hurt me?
Okay.
And so I'm writing about, you know, we had a shitty date or whatever, or like sex was not good or whatever, versus why does the audience need to know this? Why does my reader need to know this little tidbit, right? Will it help them?
Yeah.
And if it's really just me like, rah, you know, rah, 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 revenge, I'm a victim, then I take it off. So people always ask me like, why it takes so long to write? And obviously I'm trying to train myself to write faster and like,
you don't want to be producing content for the sake of it, right?
Yeah.
You have to write content that's beneficial for them.
Yeah, but I also I want to avoid like only having like one piece every like 3 months too, because that used to be my thing when I had a full time job, right? And now that I've said, okay, no, I'm gonna go full steam ahead. It still takes me a while because the thing is, when I am pouring it out, it is very, very personal. But also, so one, I'm self-editing as I write, right? But two, I am reflecting and processing as I write. So just as an example, so my last essay was actually not about sex. It was actually called "This Wasn't the Plan." And it was to explain why I took an absence of almost a year from writing. And I start off talking about because I thought it'd be funny to write about how I'm Houdini and my escape plan was I spent last year traveling. And it was out of nowhere, just by happy coincidences that I was in Hong Kong, I was in Germany, I was Switzerland, KL.
New York as well, right?
I went to New York, and it was the joke I wanted to write about was I ended up on this world tour, but it was a world tour to find myself and figure out life. But then as I'm writing the piece, I realized it was very me, 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 me. Look at these wonderful places, but boo hoo hoo, I don't know who I am. And it be I'm writing it and I'm feeling annoyed with myself. So then that's when I'm like, okay, no, what is the point I'm trying to make, right? And at the end of it, I decided, even though it was something that initially I was just I was gonna go to the grave with this secret, and unless I get super, super famous, was that immediately after I quit my job and I kind of panicked because I actually didn't have plan B. Plan B was jumping into the blog. But it takes a while to monetize writing and all of that. And so my quick fix was I'm going to go to the warehouse of Shopee. I'm going to pack orders for 5 sales. And I get in, get out, get paid, at the end of the night. And that's it. I'm I'm going to go in, night shift. No one's going to know me. No makeup, incognito. And very few people know that. My best friend, maybe another friend, those who I was safe, going back to the safety, right?
Yeah.
And no judgment. And this happened last year.
Oh.
And it was still my big, big secret until I'm writing this essay about, I'm jetting off here, jetting off there. I'm meeting old friends. But, every conversation I had with a friend was also me processing my life and where I thought I'll be and where I'm not, right? Or where I am. And I end off the essay saying, and you know what? I was just about to go off to Germany and realize, shit, I don't have enough money. So I ended up at Shopee. And the rest of the essay was this experience where I had tried to play it off as, so there's going to be a funny story one day. I'm going to be on a talk show and talk about this. Like all those famous actors who are waitresses or whatever.
Yeah.
But I do end off I start spiraling into a story of some of my education wasted, as my old job laughing at me, what if my old boss sees this or whatever, and start spiraling into self-worth. And then also start spiraling to no man will ever want me, and it has nothing to do with what I'm actually there, but it's related to my other topics about sex and whatever, because it's still self-worth. It's the stories you tell yourself, right? And I ended off with a cliffhanger. So part 2 is coming.
Yes.
Part 2 is coming.
Stay tuned.
But yeah, so those are the things that when I write, I need to consider. So it's not easy in terms of that.
Of course. I used to journal a lot, but that was when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
Ever since that, I don't know how to write and start writing. And when I write, I find myself rambling as well.
No,
is this a negative book? No.
Yeah. No, but it's good. So apart from the sex workshops, I do run journaling. I run journaling.
The workshop, together, remember?
Yeah. And then I did one recently, last December-ish, with the National Library and Kodet. And it was, again, one of those things where the idea was to journal and process, right? And I think that's a lot of times the only time that we write is in the context of school, academics, right? And again, we are is this the right thing to say? Versus journaling, which is like a word vomit.
Yeah.
It is your time to spill everything out because you're processing it.
Yeah.
And then later on, you can choose to you want to bin this, is fine. Or you want to look through and see if there's a pattern, right? The stuff we go through in the workshop. So in a way, I'm kind of lucky in the sense that my blog sometimes serve as basically me processing life.
And people definitely will relate to that.
But the flip side is I have an audience, right? Versus if you read my diary, it's horrible every other day. It's oh boo, then the public version of it is at least hopefully a little funnier and a little bit more like, and the moral of the story is boom, boom, boom.
Now, 5 years from now, do you think people will be more open about sex? Or will the silence just move to a different topic?
I hope so. I really, really hope so. I feel so tempted to drop like the word AI word. You know it was coming, right? But look, even something like AI now, right?
Yeah.
Like initially they restricted the whole like using sex or like censoring the words. And then I think they had opened it up, but it was still a bit of backlash because then can be used for like terrible things, right? So I feel like in terms of how open we can be in the next 5 years, I would hope we are. And I think that's a lot of the work that like, I mean, not just me, but, you know, my fellow advocates that we're really pushing for. And it's you know, it's getting somewhere. It's getting somewhere. I want to say that most of us kind of got our start during COVID. Because also it was, I mean, obviously it was a very interesting time to work, right? We're all holed up. So, and of course, we all get naturally like horny and stuff. But it was
Nothing
also,
to do.
yeah.
Let's do
That was, by the way, for the sex toy industry, that was like best sales ever.
Oh.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And then, but it was also a very introspective time when people start thinking about what they want to do with their life and their meaning and how and why they see things. And then once it opened up, I think just life goes on as usual, right? So, and I feel like in a way, then people don't really think about their values or beliefs as much because let's be real, most of the time it's like everyone's just worried about finances. So they're worried about milestones in life. Okay, let's put it that way. They're worried about or they're concerned with the next milestone in life. So sex itself, I feel hopefully sexual wellness would be more of something mainstream. And I think especially nowadays with women within basically our gen, we're starting going through menopause, we're starting going through perimenopause. So you'll see a lot of that in femtech. You see a lot of the menopause industry like really booming. So in that sense, I think sexual wellness would be more open and something mainstream in the next 5 years. But sex as pleasure, that's where I hope so. But, you know, I'm not going to put a date on it.
If there is one conversation you wish people would stop avoiding, not about sex specifically, but what sits underneath it, what is it?
I would say shame. The idea of shame and that we have to hide certain aspects of our lives from other people, right? So obviously it plays a big part in sex. But let's say we take the sex out of the equation. So, you know, and I've been hinting at it during this interview is like, you know, there's shame about success and finances. There's also shame about the milestones and where you thought you'll be, and that's not really the plan anymore, right?
Life is not linear.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, you have the very like toxic positivity, YOLO, like eat, pray, love kind of style stuff, which is great, but you know, it's still something that the privileged could do, right? And then you have, so I feel like a lot of people actually want to talk and share about this, about their struggles, about their day-to-day. But shame is the thing that kind of just keeps us a bit isolated. Yeah. So I feel like if there's a conversation that I just want people to start, or at least
and to normalize that, talking about it.
Just admitting like you know. And I find that in my life, like I told you, like, you know, I have zero qualms talking about sex and body parts and love and stuff. But yeah, I might have hesitations talking about other stuff because there is no one safe yet for me to talk about this with, right? And so I feel like if people can just remember that we're all feeling the same things, maybe different degrees, different priorities in terms of like where we are, but it'll make us feel less alone.
A lot to think about that.
Yes.
We should have a second episode. There's more, but but that's it for this episode, Noorin. Thank you so much for your time. It's so nice to have you in our channel. But let's catch up again, and then we'll see. Because I think you have a lot to offer. Because like what we say, right? Shame, social stigma, sex education is still very, very, very below premature. Parents talking about it, different generation. The government and the society are not really doing much, and I think you have a lot to give, but it needs a platform. And also, I need consistency too. That's my thing, right? I need to keep writing. So part 2 coming out. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.